You're sitting naked on the floor. He unchains your wrists and says nothing, just nods to the open door. You don't ask why, you run. Barefoot, bleeding, the forest tears at your skin, your lungs are screaming, your heart's beating louder, and then... This is Creepy Crossroad, where history, horror, and the unexplained meet at the crossroads where every turn leads somewhere darker. And for this first episode, I'm starting close to home. I grew up in Alaska, a place where the silence is vast and the wild is unforgiving. And for over a decade, a man used that silence to hide something unthinkable. This is the true story of Robert Hansen. Anchorage in the 70s was booming. Oil had just been discovered in Prudhoe Bay, and it changed everything. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline had been approved for construction and brought a flood of roughneckers, drifters, dreamers, mobsters, and opportunists alike. Advertised as big money, no experience needed, and adventure guaranteed. It cost about $8 billion to build, making it one of the most expensive privately funded construction projects in history. The crews faced grueling conditions, everything from whiteout, shifting permafrost, grizzly bear territory, and temperatures that would fluctuate from 90 above to 60 below zero in the winter. Strip clubs lined downtown Anchorage. Dancers were flown in from the lower 48. Now, one of the most infamous venues is the Great Alaska Bush Company, or ABC, and it was opened in 1979 and is still operating today. A lot of people know it by name, even though they probably won't admit it. I remember in the 90s, people used to say that if you were running from the law, you could just come to Alaska. The cops from the States didn't want to spend the money to chase you all the way up here. It was too remote, too expensive, too wild, and way too easy to hide. And the cops, well, they had their own way of doing things. They used to use this 3-strike policy. Like, if they picked you up on the third time, they would not take you to jail, they would not arrest you, they would file no paperwork. They would just go to this little town called Salcha, which is 40 miles outside of Fairbanks, and take your shoes and your socks and tell you to walk your ass home. Now that we have a feel of what Alaska was like at the time, let's get into it. So, Robert Hansen. He seemed like your average, soft-spoken guy, quiet, unassuming, just a baker with a stutter and a steady routine. But beneath that, there was something so much worse. And to understand how we got there, we need to rewind the clock and trace the man back to Iowa, long before he ever touched Alaskan soil. He was born in... I hate this word. Estherville. If I'm saying it wrong, I'm sorry, but Estherville, Iowa, in 1939 to Edna and Christian Hansen. Now, Christian was a Danish immigrant and a man who believed in extremely strict discipline and even stricter work ethic. He ruled the home like a drill sergeant. There was no softness and no patience to that man at all. And then meanwhile, sweet little Edna, his mother, was the type to turn a blind eye, smooth out her apron, and not intervene. She rarely questioned Christian, and Robert learned early that women yielded and men ruled. He worked from a very young age in the family bakery under that same suffocating pressure and learning obedience and silence before he ever understood any ounce of freedom at all. The family bakery was simply called Hansen's Pastry Shop, and it sat quietly in the heart of their small town of Iowa. Christian ran the front counter and enforced discipline in the shop, and Edna handled the books and the packaging, and Robert was in the back cleaning trays, restocking flour, and frosting donuts at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is when most bakers have to be there because they have to have their donuts hot and ready for the time you're ready to get up, get your coffee, and go to work. Now, the pastry shop was known for its hearty breads and old-world Danish pastries. For Robert, this was not a happy place at all. Every task was graded, every movement had been being monitored, and if Robert forgot to refill the flour bins or swept the bakery floor not just the way his father wanted it, his father would lash out at him, if not verbally, then sometimes physically as well. And you would hope that, he might have some kind of reprieve by going to school, but it was brutal for him there too. From elementary school all the way through high school, he was no kid that anybody wanted to be. He was painfully shy, and he suffered from cystic acne all over his face, and he struggled even worse with a severe stutter where every single word was a challenge for him. His classmates would mock him, girls humiliated him, and teachers would just overlook him, not try to intervene or help at all, because, these were the times. And I don't know if this was a Catholic thing or not. He originally was left-handed, and they forced him to learn how to write with his right hand, which just added to his frustration and to him feeling even more isolated. Now, by high school, Hansen wasn't just invisible, he was simmering on the inside. He retreated into these dark, obsessive fantasies where he was no longer the victim. He was in control. That contrast stuck with him. In school, he was nothing, and in the woods, he was everything. Living in rural Iowa, hunting was a very common pastime, as it is here in Alaska. But for Robert, it became more than just looking for substance. He began hunting animals for sport. In the woods, he was alone, but he was all-powerful. It was his escape, a place where he felt competent and capable and finally in control in a world that otherwise rendered him powerless. Now, in 1975, after he graduated high school, Hansen enlisted in Army Reserves, and he completed his basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And though his service was pretty short and uneventful, it marked the first time where he experienced a first taste of personal freedom. And during his time in New Jersey, Hansen reportedly visited a red light district near the base, where he had his first sexual experience with a prostitute. Now, that encounter profoundly affected him. Instead of feeling connection or pleasure, he fixated on the lack of emotional power. He didn't want transactional intimacy, he wanted dominance and control. Sex was not about connection, it was about authority. After returning home, Hansen met a woman named Phyllis, and I'm going to butcher this, Luge. But she was a quiet woman who worked in town and came from a religious background not unlike Hansen's. She likely saw in Robert what many would later see, which was someone awkward but polite, a man who seemed like he was trying to make something of himself. They ended up marrying in 1960, and for a brief moment, he seemed to be building somewhat of a respectable life. That was just on the surface. Behind closed doors, Hansen's resentment towards the world hadn't faded. Now, in 1961, that rage finally turned into some action. Still stewing over years of humiliation in high school, Hansen set the fire to his school bus garage in Pocahontas, Iowa, which is where he went to high school. He ended up being caught, sentenced for arson, and sent to a place called Anamosa State Reformatory. And Phyllis did not wait for his release. She filed for divorce while he was behind bars. I don't think she honestly realized until much later how close of a call she had. Like, she dodged a bullet on that one. But Hansen spent about 20 months in Anamosa State Reformatory, a high security facility in eastern Iowa known for housing serious offenders, mostly young men who'd already been showing signs of chronic criminal behavior. While inside, Hansen underwent a court-ordered psychological evaluation. The findings were already troubling. He was diagnosed with something called infantile personality disorder. Now, what is that exactly? Infantile personality disorder isn't a formally recognized diagnosis anymore. Today, the modern equivalent would likely fall under narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, especially when combined with sadistic fantasies or a lack of remorse. In other words, someone who never learned how to cope and decided to make everyone else pay for it. And he showed signs of extreme heterosexual conflict, meaning he struggled with sexual identity and control. He admitted to harboring violent sexual fantasies, often centered around the women who had rejected or humiliated him. He was also described as having a need to control his environment and a tendency to disassociate or mentally detach when his emotions became overwhelming. So rather than addressing these issues, the prison system shifted him into a work release program. This soon became a pattern, which, stay tuned and you will see why. But it allowed him to leave the facility by day and work in town, and it gave him some kind of structure, but it also gave him that same space to fantasize, manipulate, and rehearse, and he learned how not to get caught. So not long after his release, he met a devout Christian school teacher named Darla Henriksen. They met at a religious summer camp shortly after Hansen's release, and in 1963, Robert and Darla ended up getting married. Their shared faith and soft-spoken personalities seemed like a match made in heaven. Some describe her as being unshakably pious and a person who believed that redemption was possible for anyone. Now at this time, all across America, Alaska, which had only received its statehood in 1959, was being advertised with such slogans as, "If you can't make it anywhere else, come make it here. Start over in the north. Come disappear into something bigger where the rules don't follow you." Real good PR, people. Teacher working with children who had learning disabilities, and she also taught Sunday school at their local church. And Hansen started working at the Safeway, which I creepily have visited more times than I want to admit, and then he went to a small series of bakeries before opening his own shop. So not long after settling in Anchorage, Robert and Darla started their family. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, born in the late 60s, early 70s. They blended into their neighborhood, just perfectly happy, white picket fence, just another quiet, church-going couple with 2 great kids and a business to run. Hansen opened up a bakery in Muldoon called Hansen's Bakery. The shop was small but popular. It was tucked into a modest strip off of Muldoon Road. And he specialized in fresh donuts, sticky buns, rye bread, and most famously for these giant cinnamon rolls that locals would drive all the way across town for. Now I want cinnamon rolls.
I smell cinnamon rolls.
I'm gonna go get a cinnamon roll after this. It was the perfect cover. No one looked twice at the quiet baker with the steady schedule and the best apple fritters on the block. But he also made a name for himself in the hunting world. He became a champion hunter. He was known for taking down Dall sheep. Now, Dall sheep are notoriously elusive creatures to find, and they require a lot of patience, precision, and rugged endurance. Hansen earned his pilot's license, and it wasn't for sightseeing or business, it was for access. With his small Piper Super Cub, he could reach remote parts of Alaska that no one else could. He flew himself to hunting grounds so isolated that there were no roads, and eventually it became his perfect killing field. He bought a remote plot of land just north of Anchorage and built a one-room cabin. No plumbing, no electricity, no neighbors, just trees, isolation, and silence. And the thing is that as creepy as that is, a lot of people out here in Alaska have a little hunting camp. Now, the Knik River area and the Chugiak National Forest, which kind of surround Anchorage, the forest alone covers about 490,000 acres worth of winding rivers, glaciers, dense forests, and snow-capped mountains. And it is where he did most of his hunting. This area is very hard to get to and also extremely isolated. And just to give you a perspective, the Chugiak National Forest is 495,000 acres and New York City is 300,000 acres. So if that kind of gives you an idea. But in the early 70s, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game had actually issued over 125,000 hunting licenses in the state. So more than 1 in 4 adult residents held a license, which at that time was the highest in the nation per capita. But Hansen, it didn't start with murder with him. It started with resentment. Hansen hated women who rejected him, and especially those who were confident, attractive, and sexually autonomous. He said they reminded him of the girls who laughed at him in high school, and eventually the resentment turned into this obsession, and then into something much worse. In 1971, on November 15th, Hansen spotted 19-year-old Susie Heppard while she was driving in Anchorage. He followed her all throughout town, and eventually they both pulled up to a stoplight, and he got out of his car with a gun and tried to force her into his vehicle. But because of her quick thinking, she floored it and just took off, weaving into oncoming traffic and heading straight to the police station. And that's where she filed a report. Her detailed description of Hansen and his car helped authorities track him down within days. He was arrested and court ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. And after being released, just weeks later, he abducted and 18-year-old Barbara Fields. Posing as a photographer or a model scout, Hansen offered her money and suggested a trip to his remote cabin for a great photo shoot, and once in his car, his entire demeanor completely shifted. He pulled out a gun, handcuffed her, and held her at gunpoint. Fields was taken to a remote area where she was violently assaulted and terrorized. This poor girl, she was 19. Hansen threatened to kill her if she didn't cooperate, and after hours of abuse, he drove her back toward Anchorage and released her on the condition that she would never speak of what happened. Like, I mean, are you really that stupid? Like, oh, don't say anything. Like, really? Maybe it was a different time, but like, come on, when does that actually ever work? But Barbara did do the unthinkable, especially for women of that time, as she went to the police. She gave a detailed statement describing Hansen, his car, the remote area where he had taken her, and investigators were able to verify parts of her account, including the tire tracks and landmarks matching her description. Hansen was arrested and brought in for questioning, and of course denied all the allegations completely, but he couldn't explain away the matching vehicle, his proximity to the area, the mounting details Field had supplied. But despite all this evidence, it was his calm demeanor and the psychiatrist's testimony that helped him avoid serious prison time. Disturbingly, just days later, a body of another young woman was found near the exact same area that Fields had been taken. During Hansen's trial, psychiatrist Dr. Ray Langdon, you decide, testified that Hansen exhibited dissociative behavior and could benefit from counseling. You think? We figured this out in Iowa. Like, what are you doing? Despite the violent nature of his crimes and Fields' clear testimony, the court accepted the recommendation that Hansen was sentenced to, here's that term again, a work release program. And this allowed him to work during the day and return back to the halfway facility at night, and mandatory therapy under psychiatric supervision. And just like that, he was back on the streets, free to offend again. And clearly, this would prove to be absolutely catastrophic. By the mid-70s, Hansen had perfected his complied, and if they didn't, he flew them out to his Knik River cabin, released them, and hunted them like animals. Like, let's just pause here for a second. He would take these women, tie them up, like bind them up in some way, and just let them run into the wilderness for their lives. To be able to do that to a human being, like, this is beyond up. Like, I can't even imagine what those women were going through. So what I have now is, because there's so many, I tried to put it in the best kind of a timeline that I could. And this is a series of final moments, chance encounters, and vanishing points for the victims. Here's what we know. Sela Beth Van Zatten, a teenager from Anchorage, vanished near McHugh Creek in 1971. Her body was found in the snow with her hands bound. She likely tried to escape barefoot. Hansen never confessed to this, but the details aligned way too much with his method and the timeline of things. Mary Thill, 22, originally from New York, disappeared near Seward Highway in 1975, possibly lured with an offer of modeling. Buried south of Anchorage. The only way they were able to identify her was through dental records, sadly. And it was also linked to Hansen's map, which I will get into later. The most infamous one related to this case was a woman that has been called Eklutna Annie. Still unidentified, still believed to be Hansen's first victim. They found her near Eklutna Lake in 1980. Hansen admitted she fought back, and her identity still remains unknown to this day, sadly. Joanna Messina, 24, from New York City. She disappeared from Seward in 1980, lured, flown to a remote location, shot and buried near a gravel pit. Hansen confirmed the location on his map. Tamra Tammy Pedersen, 20, from Oregon. She was known to be a runaway and was last seen in Anchorage in 1980. Very vulnerable and alone, her remains were found near Eklutna gravel pit, confirmed via forensics and Hansen's map. Cheryl Merrow, a 23-year-old dancer, originally from Idaho, was lured with the idea of a photo shoot offer in 1981. Flown to the Knik River, hunted, and shot in the back. They found her blindfolded a year later and fit Hansen's full pattern. And the disturbing thing about that one is that she clearly must have been running through the woods blindfolded. That is just absolutely terrifying. Andrea Fish Alteri, a 24-year-old dancer from Hawaii, known as Fish by her trademark fish necklace that she would wear. She was last seen outside the club in 1981. Now, her body was never found, but her fish pendant was recovered from Hansen's ceiling, linking her to his trophy ritual. Sue Luna, 23, from Fairbanks, lured in 1982 with a photo shoot offer. Flown to a wilderness, hunted, and killed. Psycho. Next was Angela Fettern, a 24, from Oregon, last seen in Anchorage in 1983. She was found at Horseshoe Lake. Her body matched one of Hansen's red X's and confirmed through location and profile. Lisa Frutrell, 41, from California, vanished outside the club in 1983, possibly resisted, flown and hunted near Knik River. Her body was recovered, mapped out and matched to Hansen's pattern. Delynn Frey, 22, of Washington, a very well-known sex worker, last seen on 4th Avenue, lured by a photo gig, flown to Knik River area and killed. Her grave is marked on Hansen's aviation map. Robin Pelkey, 19 years old. So she was known for years as Horseshoe Harriet, and she grew up in Colorado, going from shelter to shelter in the foster system as a child, and she made her way to Alaska, and then she was brutally killed and buried near Horseshoe Lake. But recently, in 2021, she was actually identified through DNA evidence and genealogy, so thanks to technological advancements, she's been able to be identified and, given some kind of rest, I guess. Roxanne Eastland, from Idaho, disappeared 1980, last seen leaving a hotel near downtown Anchorage. No body was ever recovered, her name was barely mentioned in headlines, just another woman who vanished off the streets. Malai Larson, 28 years old, from Alaska, disappeared 1981. Found years later in a shallow grave near the Knik River, but for years she was just another missing person in a place where people disappeared often. Teresa Watson, believed to be from the Pacific Northwest, she vanished in the early 80s, lured like the others, with a promise that turned into a trap. Little was written about her, no photos circulated. Then comes Cindy Paulson, a 17-year-old sex worker, originally from Washington. Cindy had been living in Anchorage when Hansen abducted her in June of 1983. He offered her $200, which in today's day and age would be roughly equivalent to $650 for. And then once he got her into the car, he pulled a gun on her, handcuffed her, and drove her to his home. She was held captive overnight in his soundproof basement, restrained by a chain around her neck. The next morning, Hansen told her he was taking her to his remote cabin, which required a flight from a small local airport. He unchained her, allowed her to get dressed, and drove her to Merrill Field, where his Piper Super Cub bush plane was parked. As Hansen loaded his supplies into the plane and his back was turned, Cindy saw saw that the car was unlocked and this was her chance. She booked it. She ran barefoot, still partially bound, and flagged down a passing truck, and the driver picked her up and he took her to a nearby motel where she called the police. October 27th, 1983. After Cindy Paulson escaped, she did everything right. She gave a detailed description of Hansen's house, car, plane, and even the inside of his basement. She remembered the mounted animals on the wall, the plastic tarp, the chains. Mosquito. At first, they didn't believe her. She was a teenager, a sex worker, and Hansen was this respected business owner in the town, a baker, a dad, a churchgoer. But that changed thanks to one man, Detective Glenn Floth. He was one of the Alaska State Troopers. He had been quietly tracking a string of murders and disappearances that all seemed to be connected. Women who vanished from downtown Anchorage and turned up dead in remote areas. They were typically shot in the back and buried in shallow graves. Floth was methodical. He revisited cold cases, re-interviewed survivors like Barbara Fields, and cross-referenced missing persons reports, but still the case lacked one thing, a clear picture of who they were looking for. That's when Floth reached out to Quantico, and FBI profiler John Douglas joined the team. Douglas had been working with the Behavioral Science Unit, and he reviewed case files, crime scene photos, and victim profiles, and built what we now know as a psychological profile. According to Douglas, the killer would be someone who would be socially awkward, likely with a speech impediment, a history of rejection by women, and an obsessive need for control. He would also be a very skilled hunter, someone who kept trophies and returned to his crime scenes. The profiler even predicted that the killer would likely be married, seemingly ordinary, and might have a background in aviation experience and remote wilderness. Every detail pointed directly to Robert Hansen. Even before the warrant was issued, Douglas's insight helped Floth tighten the net, focus the investigation, and build the case that would take Hansen down. Meanwhile, the search expanded. They questioned associates, examined hunting licenses, and looked into flight logs. The break came when a warrant was finally approved to search Hansen's property, based on the mounting circumstantial evidence and the testimony of Cindy Paulson. It wasn't just her word, it was how her details matched earlier unsolved reports, how the timeline aligned, and how his behavior mirrored the FBI profile. That search would crack the case wide open. Authorities executed a search warrant on Hansen's home, vehicle, plane. Inside, they found a .223 Ruger Mini 14, which was a match for the bullets at multiple crime scenes, a stash of jewelry hiding in the ceiling panels, including Andrea's fish pendant, newspaper clippings of his crimes, because he's not a narcissist or anything, and the aviation map peppered with X's. So basically, this map here, Hansen put an X at every single point where he had buried a body. And so that became a crucial piece of evidence in this entire case to help identifying victims. And Hansen denied all of it. But then, once the pressure of the police and the weight of the law came down on him, he broke. He ended up confessing to 17 murders. There's a squirrel. He's got something in his mouth. It's a squirrel. If I don't move, maybe he'll come by. Where'd you go, little squirrel? He described the acts in very calm, clinical detail. He told investigators how he would chain women up to a post in his basement, lay out plastic drop cloths to keep the space clean, and he would punish them. He explained step by step how he selected his victims, how he prepared the basement in advance, and how he transported them. He described choosing which ones would live and if he would fly them out to the wilderness. In one chilling interview, he spoke about watching the terror in their eyes as he released them into the woods. I'd give them a head start, then I'd go after them, like prey. He was so cold and meticulous and free of any emotion. It was almost as if he was reciting a bakery recipe or recalling a hunting trip, not talking about brutally murdering a human being. He explained that the bad girls deserved it, that if a woman offered sex for money, she wasn't really being You can't a prostitute. Okay, that's not how that works. When troopers flew him over the Knik River area to identify the burial sites that went on related to his map that he had, Hansen grew notably animated and excited. He leaned eagerly out of the helicopter window, scanning the terrain below, and he directed pilots to the specific spots that he remembered. And once he got there, Hansen would hop out, trudging through the snow, and he would drop to his knees and began digging with his bare hands to uncover the bones that he had buried years before. It was as if he was reliving it or reclaiming his work. His cabin in the woods was very grim and deadly. It had a rope, tarp, and tools. No frills, just function. It was built for control. In 1984, Robert pleads guilty to only 4 murders as a part of a deal to avoid the death penalty. But later he did end up confessing to a total of 17. But he was sentenced to 461 years to life with no chance of parole. But the city of Anchorage absolutely lost their like, people who had bought cinnamon rolls from him, chatted with him at the bakery counter, even fellow hunters were completely blindsided. Like, this man donated pastries to school fundraisers, gave away day-old donuts to seniors, and over a decade, he played the part of a polite, soft-spoken man, and no one suspected a thing. Just the man with the cinnamon rolls, apparently. But behind all of that, like he was doing some like next level, you know? My question though in all this was, where was his wife? Like, what was she doing? Did she just like, ooh, everything's good? Like, where you at, Darla? Like, what happened? So I did some digging. So Darla had remained a fixture of the community, working with the children, attending church, raising their 2 kids, and by all accounts living a very deeply structured life. She taught Sunday school and donated to religious organizations, but she was very quiet and extremely dutiful. She also maintained a very strict separation between her world and her husband's. Like, Darla didn't often visit the bakery during Hansen's early morning shifts, she didn't fly with him, and she certainly never went to the cabin. According to investigators, the basement where many of the victims were chained up and, was off limits. Even their children were forbidden from playing down there. Neighbors also said that Darla kept to herself and no one really recalled seeing anything unusual. So whether she suspected anything is still debated. Some believe her religious devotion led her to stay in denial, and others think that she just knew just enough to stay silent. But during the investigation, she did fully cooperate with the police and filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. So right after that, she ended up moving out of state and raised her kids away from the media spotlight and kept them completely out of it, which I don't blame her for. Like, good move on your part. When asked years later about her ex-husband, Darla reportedly said, "That man died in Alaska," which she's not wrong, because in 2014 in the Anchorage Correctional Complex, he did die, never showing one day of remorse the entire time he was in. You know, you grow up in Alaska and you hear these stories of moose tramplings, whiteouts, bar fights, people getting lost, hunting or fishing. These things happen. But this one sticks. It happened right here. My mom in Anchorage, when she was a kid, used to walk by his bakery on the way home from school. Luckily, she wasn't in his criteria or his profile that he was looking for. This is so real. This could happen. These are people that we interact with regularly, so it's kind of a pretty screwy deal when these are the people that you trust. It just makes you pull back from everything. It makes you second guess a lot. But Anchorage wasn't just a city in the wild, it was the wild. And Hansen, he turned it into his own hunting ground. But one thing he didn't count on was a girl who had the courage to run. And if you're from Alaska, you've probably already heard this or knew parts of it. Maybe you heard it from your uncle or your parents. Maybe you hunted in those same woods, but now you know the full truth. And if you think this is the darkest part of Alaska's past, buckle up, because Creepy Crossroad has more stories to dig up. And don't forget to subscribe and give a thumbs up if you learned something you didn't know. And be sure to click that notification bell, because I do have new episodes coming out once a week. But until next time, stay creepy.